He didn't just hand me the divorce papers, he threw them. The packet slapped against my chest hard enough to leave a mark, pages scattering across the marble floor like confetti at a funeral. Salvatore thought he was executing a prisoner. He had no idea he was signing his own death warrant. What destroyed him wasn't the $31.4 million I'd accumulated in silence, it was realizing I had never needed him at all. If you have ever been dismissed as decorative, this story is for you. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's get to the story. My name is Roxanne Aston, and at 36 years old, I was standing in the living room of a house that had stopped feeling like home years ago. The air smelled of leather and expensive cologne, Salvatore's signature scent, the one he wore when he wanted to intimidate. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the cold marble that had never warmed beneath my feet, no matter how many years I'd walked across it. Across from me, my husband looked like a man who had just won the Super Bowl. At 42, Salvatore Aston was the golden boy of the luxury automotive world, CEO of Aston Performance Group, and the man who was currently divorcing me with the enthusiasm of a child ripping open birthday presents. He stood there in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, his posture relaxed, his shoulders loose. He was grinning, not the polite, somber expression suitable for ending a decade-long marriage, but a wide, triumphant grin that stretched his handsome face into something ugly. He picked up his phone, probably to text his mistress the good news, and the casual cruelty of the gesture made my jaw tighten. Behind him, through the doorway, I could see his lawyer's briefcase still open on the dining table, documents spilling out like evidence of a crime already committed. "You should be grateful, Roxanne," he said, not bothering to look at me as he scrolled through his messages. 20 grand and you keep your jewelry. That's more than fair for someone who's contributed. What, exactly? Yoga Instagram posts? Charity luncheons? He laughed, a short, barking sound devoid of warmth. "You've been living off me for years. Time to see what the real world looks like." The insult landed with precision. He knew exactly where to hit. He'd spent months, maybe years, crafting this narrative, telling friends and business associates that I was the trophy wife who'd gotten too comfortable, the dead weight dragging down his meteoric rise. To him, I was the woman who just did yoga and shopping, the decorative piece that had served its purpose and could now be discarded. I didn't answer. I didn't move to pick up the scattered papers. I just stood there, hands at my sides, watching him with the kind of stillness that should have warned him. In the reflection of the window behind him, I could see my own face, calm, composed, unreadable. I looked like a woman in shock, which is exactly what he expected to see. What he didn't see was the slight curve at the corner of my mouth. What he didn't hear was the sound of heels clicking across the marble entryway. What he didn't know was that the front door had just opened, and my lawyer, Margot Lane, had stepped inside carrying a leather portfolio that weighed more than Salvatore's entire strategy. I felt a surge of something hot and electric in my chest, not rage, not anymore. I'd burned through rage months ago, during the sleepless nights when I discovered his affair, during the humiliating dinners where he'd belittled me in front of his executives, during every moment he'd looked at me like I was furniture he'd grown tired of dusting. This wasn't rage. This was clarity. This was power. This was the moment every underestimated woman dreams of, the moment when silence stops being weakness and becomes a loaded gun. Salvatore was still talking, something about how I should thank him for the fresh start, when Margot cleared her throat from the doorway. He spun around, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. "Who the hell?" he started, then stopped. His eyes landed on Margot, taking in her severe black suit, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a knot that meant business, and the portfolio clutched against her chest like a shield. Or a weapon. "Mr. Aston," Margot said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that comes from 30 years of courtroom warfare. "I'm Margot Lane, Mrs. Aston's legal counsel. I believe we have some documents to review before you finalize anything." Salvatore's grin faltered. "Just slightly. Just enough." He glanced at me, then back at Margot, confusion creeping into his expression. "Her lawyer? Roxanne doesn't have, she can't afford, he caught himself, realizing how that sounded, but the damage was done. He'd already revealed what he thought of me. "I'm here pro bono," Margot lied smoothly, and I nearly smiled. The retainer I'd paid her would have funded a small country's legal system, but Salvatore didn't need to know that. Not yet. "This is ridiculous," Salvatore said, recovering his composure, puffing his chest out. "The settlement's already drawn up. She's getting a generous offer, and she should take it before I change my mind." "Generous," Margot repeated, tasting the word like it had gone sour. Interesting choice of language. She walked further into the room, heels clicking with military precision, and set the portfolio down on the coffee table between us. The sound it made, a solid, heavy thud, echoed in the high-ceilinged room. Salvatore stared at it. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "What's that?" he asked, trying to sound dismissive but landing somewhere closer to nervous. "That," Margot said, unzipping the portfolio with deliberate slowness, "is the truth." I watched Salvatore's face as Margot began pulling out documents, thick stacks of them, bound with tabs and highlighter marks and post-it flags in a rainbow of colors. Financial statements. Asset valuations. Corporate registrations. Shareholder agreements. The paper trail of a life he'd never bothered to notice I was living. "Mrs. Aston won't be accepting your settlement offer," Margot continued, laying out the documents like a dealer spreading cards. "Because your offer is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation." "What situation?" Salvatore snapped, but his voice had lost its edge. He was looking at the documents now, really looking, and I could see the exact moment when the pieces started to fall into place in his mind, when the casual dismissal turned to confusion, then to something darker. Margot pulled out the final document, a single page, printed on heavyweight paper, with a number at the bottom that had been circled in red ink. "The situation," she said, sliding it across the table toward him, "is that your wife is worth $31.4 million. All of it separate property. All of it earned independently. None of it yours." The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a home at rest, but the terrible, suffocating silence of a world being turned inside out. Salvatore picked up the paper with hands that had started to shake. His eyes scanned the number once. Twice. 3 times, as if repetition would somehow change what was written there. His mouth opened, then closed. His face went from tan to pale to an unhealthy shade of gray. "This is," he started, voice cracking. "This is a mistake. This is fraud. Roxanne doesn't have, she can't." "She did," Margot said simply. "She does. And she's about to walk out of this marriage with everything she came in with, plus 55% of the marital estate, courtesy of your attempts to defraud the court." I watched him crumble. Not all at once, that would have been too kind. Instead, I watched him break in slow motion, piece by piece, as the reality of what he'd missed settled into his bones like poison. The man who had called me a leech was realizing, in real time, that he had been living in my shadow all along. And in my mind, I was no longer in that cold marble living room. I was somewhere else entirely, 8 years in the past, in a venture capital office in downtown Manhattan, where a younger version of myself was learning exactly how to build an empire while everyone else was looking the other way. This is where my real story begins. I met Salvatore Aston on a Tuesday in April, in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. He was pitching to my firm, Greystone Venture Capital, looking for seed money to expand his boutique automotive customization business into something bigger. At 28, I was one of the youngest associates at Greystone, and I had a reputation for spotting diamonds in coal mines. I'd made the firm $7 million the previous year by betting on a logistics software company everyone else had dismissed as too niche. My instincts were sharp. My track record was flawless. And when Salvatore Aston walked into that room wearing a suit that didn't quite fit and carrying a vision that was 3 sizes too big, I saw potential. Not just in his business. In him. He was magnetic in the way only truly ambitious people are, all fire and confidence and dreams that hadn't been crushed yet by reality. He talked about luxury vehicles the way poets talk about love, reverently, obsessively, with a passion that made you believe he could bend the market to his will through sheer force of wanting it badly enough. "I don't want to just modify cars," he said, leaning forward, eyes blazing. "I want to redefine what luxury performance means. I want Aston Performance Group to be the name people whisper when they talk about automotive perfection." My senior partner thought he was delusional. I thought he was determined. There's a difference. I was the one who championed his pitch. I was the one who convinced Greystone to take a chance on an unproven CEO with more charisma than collateral. And when the deal closed, I was the one Salvatore took to dinner to celebrate, a dinner that turned into drinks, that turned into walking through the city until 2 a.m., talking about ambition and risk and the strange electricity that happens when two driven people recognize each other in a crowd. "You see it, don't you?" he said, stopping under a streetlight, his face half in shadow. "You see what I'm building." "I see what you could build," I corrected, but I was smiling. He kissed me right there, tasting like whiskey and possibility, and I kissed him back because I was 28 and brilliant and tired of being the smartest person in every room. I wanted to be someone's partner. I wanted to build something together. I just didn't realize he wanted me to stop building anything of my own. The first year of marriage was intoxicating. Salvatore's business exploded exactly the way I'd predicted. My predictions always came true, that was my gift, and suddenly we were the couple everyone envied. He was the visionary CEO, I was the elegant wife who believed in him first. He introduced me at galas as his good luck charm, his secret weapon, the woman who saw his potential before anyone else. It felt like partnership. Like we were building an empire together, brick by brick, vision by vision. But somewhere around month 14, the narrative started to shift. "You know what I love about you?" Salvatore said one night, after a particularly successful investor meeting. We were in bed, his hand tracing lazy patterns on my shoulder. "You're not like those corporate women. You're warm. Real. You don't have that edge they all have." I should have heard the warning in those words. I didn't. "I was thinking," he continued, voice casual, "maybe you should take some time off. From Greystone, I mean. We're doing well enough now. You don't need to work those crazy hours. Wouldn't it be nice to just breathe? Be present? Support what we're building together?" The word "we" was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. "I like my work," I said carefully. "I'm good at it." "You're good at everything, Rox." He kissed my temple. "But you're also exhausted." And honestly, some of the investors have made comments about how it looks, you know? The CEO's wife working at a VC firm. Like I can't provide for you. Like you don't trust my success. There it was. The thing he'd actually been building toward. Not concern for my well-being. Concern for his image. "That's ridiculous," I said. "My career has nothing to do with." I know. He pulled back, sitting up, and I could see the frustration creeping into his expression. "But perception matters in this business. And I need you to understand, I'm building something huge here. Something that requires a certain presentation. The traditional power couple. The supportive wife who runs the home front while the husband conquers the business world. It's old school, maybe, but it works. You want me to quit? I want you to choose us," he said, making it sound like those were the same thing. "Choose what we're building together. Choose to be my partner in a way that actually matters." The manipulation was so smooth I almost didn't catch it. Almost. But I did catch it. And I felt something cold settle into my chest, something that whispered this was the beginning of a long erosion, that I was standing at the edge of a cliff I couldn't see yet. Still, I loved him. And he'd made it sound so reasonable. So temporary. Just until the company stabilized. Just until his reputation was solidified. Just until. I gave my notice at Greystone 2 weeks later. My senior partner looked at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. "You're making a mistake, Roxanne. You have a gift. Don't throw it away for I'm not throwing anything away, I interrupted. I'm choosing my marriage. But walking out of that building for the last time, I felt like I was leaving a piece of myself behind on the trading floor. What Salvatore didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was that I hadn't actually stopped working. I just stopped doing it in a way he could see. Because the thing about spending 8 years in venture capital is that you learn to spot patterns invisible to everyone else. You learn which markets are about to explode. You learn which CEOs are bullshitting and which ones are building something real. You learn that timing isn't everything, it's the only thing. And I had impeccable timing. I'd saved aggressively during my Greystone years, living below my means, investing my bonuses in index funds and small position plays that compounded quietly. By the time I married Salvatore, I had 180,000 in liquid assets and another 180,000 in liquid assets and another 180,000 in liquid assets and another 90,000 in retirement accounts. Not life-changing money. But seed money. Foundation money. Money Salvatore never asked about, because he assumed my finances were his to absorb once we said, I do. While he spent his weekends golfing with investors and his evenings hosting client dinners I was expected to smile prettily through, I spent my mornings in the home office he barely noticed, tracking the markets. I joined private investor groups under my maiden name, Roxanne, keeping my married identity separate from my financial one. I researched emerging tech companies, AI startups, sustainable logistics firms, anything positioned at the intersection of innovation and inevitability. I started small. $5,000 in a quantum computing startup everyone thought was too speculative. $10,000 in a micromobility company my old colleagues called a fad. $15,000 in an AI-driven supply chain platform that hadn't even launched yet. Salvatore thought I was reading cheesy business books and planning charity fundraisers. I was building an empire in silence. The quantum computing company went public 18 months later. My 5,000 became 5,000 became 5,000 became 47,000. I rolled it into 3 more positions. The micromobility company got acquired by a major automotive manufacturer, ironic, given Salvatore's industry, and my return was 940%. I reinvested everything, never touching the principal, letting the gains compound like interest on a secret no one knew I was keeping. By year 3 of our marriage, my portfolio was worth $890,000. By year 5, $2.1 million. And Salvatore still thought I spent my days doing hot yoga and shopping for organic vegetables. Year 6 was when I created Ironbridge Logistics LLC. I'd been watching the industrial real estate market, noticing the shortage of climate-controlled warehouse space in strategic distribution corridors. Automotive parts, especially luxury components, required specific storage conditions. Temperature control. Security. Proximity to major highways. The demand was exploding, but the supply was stagnant. I saw the gap. I always saw the gaps. I used $600,000 of my portfolio gains as a down payment on a 50,000 square foot warehouse facility in a logistics hub 30 miles outside the city. I registered the LLC under my maiden name, kept the paperwork separate, ran everything through accounts Salvatore had no visibility into. 6 months later, I had 3 commercial tenants. The rental income was $22,000 per month, almost all profit after the mortgage and maintenance costs. And then Salvatore's COO called me, or rather, called the owner of Ironbridge Logistics, asking about leasing 15,000 square feet for Aston Performance Group's imported parts storage. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I negotiated a 3-year lease at $18,000 per month, with annual escalation clauses and penalty fees for early termination. I signed the documents as our managing member. Salvatore's company wired the first month's rent and security deposit into my business account. And Salvatore never knew. Never asked. Never suspected that the warehouse his company relied on was owned by the wife he'd started calling lazy at dinner parties. The insult started subtly, then grew teeth. Roxanne just does yoga and lunch, he'd say to business associates, laughing like it was charming. Like I was a pet with amusing habits. It must be nice not having any real responsibilities, he said one morning, watching me read the Wall Street Journal over coffee. Some of us actually have to work. I don't know what you do all day, he said another time, irritation sharpening his voice, but the house is a mess and dinner isn't ready. What exactly are you contributing here? I stopped arguing. I stopped defending myself. I just got quieter on the outside while something inside me crystallized into diamond-hard clarity. I tracked every insult. Every dismissive comment. Every time he made me feel small in front of others. I kept records not because I was planning anything, not consciously, but because some part of me knew I might need them. I maintained separate accounts. I kept meticulous financial documentation. I made sure every dollar I invested could be traced back to premarital assets or my own post-marital earnings from Ironbridge and stock dividends. I built a paper trail so clean it could survive an audit from God. And my portfolio kept growing. 5.2 million, 5.2 million. 5.2 million, 8.7 million. $12.3 million. By year 9, I was worth more than Salvatore's company. He had no idea. The email arrived on a Wednesday. Subject line, confidential, expansion strategy review. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Salvatore, from his executive assistant, Rebecca. But Rebecca had made a mistake, she'd forwarded it to our shared household email instead of his business account. A simple typo. A digital slip that would change everything. I almost deleted it without reading. Almost. But something made me click. The document was a strategy memo, outlining Salvatore's plan for a major business expansion. New facilities. New investors. Projected growth of 300% over 3 years. It was ambitious, aggressive, exactly the kind of vision that had made me fall in love with him a decade ago. And buried in Section 7, under Personal Asset Protection and Risk Mitigation, was a paragraph that made my blood turn to ice. Given the projected business volatility and personal liability concerns, SR recommends preemptive dissolution of current marital partnership prior to expansion phase. Timing critical to ensure clean asset separation and minimize community property exposure. Proposed settlement offer sufficient to avoid litigation but minimal enough to preserve capital for reinvestment. Target, $50,000 lump sum, vehicle retention, standard confidentiality clause. I read it 3 times, making sure I wasn't misunderstanding. He wasn't leaving me because he'd fallen out of love. He wasn't leaving me because we'd grown apart. He was leaving me because his lawyers had told him to, because I was a liability on a balance sheet, a potential claim on assets he wanted fully under his control. I was being divorced for tax efficiency. The strangest part was that I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't feel the hot rush of betrayal I probably should have felt. Instead, I felt something colder. Clearer. Sharper. I forwarded the email to my private account. I took screenshots. I documented the date, the time, the metadata. And then I whispered to the empty kitchen, my voice steady as stone. So that's how you want to play. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd saved months ago but never called. The number from Margot Lane, the lawyer whose reputation for destroying overconfident husbands was legendary. She answered on the second ring. Ms. Lane, I said, voice calm, controlled, and dangerous. My name is Roxanne Aston, and I need to dissolve a marriage. But first, I need to win a war. Margot Lane's office didn't look like a place where marriages went to die. It looked like a place where empires were built. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city's financial district, glass and steel towers glinting in the afternoon sun like knives waiting to be sharpened. The furniture was mid-century modern, clean lines, no softness, everything designed for function over comfort. On the wall behind her desk hung a single-framed quote, "The best revenge is massive success." Frank Sinatra. I sat across from her, my hands folded in my lap, my spine straight. I'd dressed carefully for this meeting, Armani suit in charcoal gray, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a knot that meant business. I wanted to look like someone worth fighting for. Someone worth believing in. Margot studied me over the rim of her reading glasses, silver hair swept back, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She was 63 and had spent the last 3 decades destroying men who'd underestimated their wives. Her retainer was $50,000. Her reputation was priceless. "Tell me everything," she said, clicking her pen once. "And I mean everything. The good, the bad, and the parts you're embarrassed about. I can't protect you from landmines I don't know are buried." So I told her. About Salvatore's plan to divorce me before his expansion. About the leaked email. About the $50,000 settlement offer that was supposed to make me grateful. About 9 years of being called decorative, useless, a burden on his success. Margot's expression didn't change, but I saw her pen moving faster across her legal pad. "And your financial situation?" she asked. "Assets, income, savings?" "That's the interesting part," I said. I slid a USB drive across her desk. "Everything's on here. Complete documentation going back 10 years. She plugged it into her laptop, and I watched her face as she opened the first file. Then the second. Then the third. Her eyes widened, just slightly, just enough, and I knew she was seeing what I needed her to see. "Ms. Aston," she said slowly, scrolling through page after page of financial statements, "are these numbers accurate? Down to the last cent?" She leaned back in her chair, removing her glasses, studying me with new intensity. "You're telling me that while your husband was planning to toss you out with a used car and grocery money, you were sitting on," she glanced at the screen, "north of $30 million? $31.4 million as of last quarter," I corrected. The tech sector had a good run. For the first time since I'd entered her office, Margot Lane smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just spotted blood in the water. "Oh, honey," she said, leaning forward, "we are going to destroy him." The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in strategic warfare. Margot assigned me homework like I was studying for the bar exam. She wanted documentation for every asset, every transaction, every dollar that had flowed through my accounts for the past decade. She wanted valuations, appraisals, shareholder statements, corporate registrations, tax returns, bank statements, brokerage statements, proof of purchase, proof of sale, proof of everything. "Your husband's lawyers will try to claim commingling," she explained during our second meeting. "They'll argue that your investments were made possible by marital funds, that you used his money to build your portfolio, that you're not entitled to separate property classification. We need to prove, beyond any shadow of doubt, that every single dollar you invested came from premarital assets or postmarital income streams that were entirely yours." "I kept everything separate," I said. "Different accounts, different names, different tax filings under my maiden name for the LLC. I never touched marital funds." "Good. But we're going to need to prove it. Which means we need a forensic accountant." She brought in Gerald Moss, a man who looked like someone's kindly uncle but had the investigative instincts of a bloodhound. He spent 72 hours buried in my financial records, tracing every transaction back to its source, building a timeline that could survive a Supreme Court challenge. "It's clean," he reported, looking almost disappointed that he couldn't find any problems. "Remarkably clean. Premarital savings of $270,000, all documented. Postmarital investment returns, all traceable to the original principal. Ironbridge Logistics LLC income, completely separate. Not a single dollar of commingling." It's almost like she knew she'd need to prove this someday. Margot glanced at me. "Did you?" "Not consciously," I said. "But maybe some part of me was always preparing for this." "Smart instincts," she said. "They're going to save your life." At home, Salvatore's behavior shifted from dismissive to openly contemptuous. He'd filed for divorce the week after I'd found the email, serving me papers through a courier like I was a business transaction he was closing. He moved into the guest house. We had a guest house, that's how successful his company had become, and began treating the main house like a hotel he occasionally visited to pick up belongings. When we crossed paths, he couldn't resist twisting the knife. You should start looking for apartments, he said one evening, not even glancing up from his phone as he grabbed a bottle of wine from the refrigerator. Something small. Manageable. Within your budget. I'll keep that in mind, I said evenly, chopping vegetables for a dinner he wouldn't eat. Rebecca found some listings. Studios, mostly. About $1,500 a month. That should be doable with the settlement I'm offering. If you're careful. He wanted me to beg. To panic. To ask him to reconsider. Instead, I slid the chopped carrots into a bowl and reached for the celery. You know what your problem is, Roxanne, he continued, pouring himself a glass of Cabernet, a $400 bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion. Apparently divorce qualified. You never developed yourself. You had potential once, but you got comfortable. Lazy. You let me do all the heavy lifting while you just existed. I said, non-committal. I'm not trying to be cruel, he said, and I almost laughed at the lie. I'm trying to prepare you for reality. You're going to need to get a job. A real job. Maybe as an assistant somewhere, or in retail. Something entry-level. I mean, it's been what, 9 years since you worked? You're basically starting over. I set down the knife and turned to face him, my expression calm, my voice steady. Thank you for the advice, Salvatore. I'll take it under consideration. He stared at me, clearly frustrated that I wasn't crumbling. You don't even care, do you? You're just empty. No ambition. No fire. I don't know what I ever saw in you. You saw someone you could control, I thought. You saw someone you could make small. But out loud, I just said, I hope you enjoy the wine. He left, shaking his head, convinced he'd married a shell of a woman who would disappear quietly into obscurity. He had no idea he was living in a house owned by a woman who could buy him 3 times over. The discovery came during our third strategy session, when Margot and I were reviewing the Ironbridge logistics documentation. Walk me through the tenant list, she said, scanning the rental income spreadsheet. I want to know every company that's paying you, in case any of them have connections to your husband. I pulled up the master file. 3 tenants currently. Cascade Distribution, they're a third-party logistics company. Harbor Medical Supply, they do pharmaceutical storage. I stopped. Stared at the screen. Felt something cold and electric shoot down my spine. And what? Margot prompted. Aston Performance Group, I said slowly. They're the primary tenant. 15,000 square feet. $18,000 per month. 3-year lease signed in. I scrolled to the contract date. August 2022. Margot went very still. Your husband's company has been paying you rent? For nearly 3 years. And he doesn't know it's your company? The LLC is registered under my maiden name. All correspondence goes through my business email. The lease was negotiated by my property manager. Salvatore's COO handles facilities. Salvatore probably never even looked at the paperwork. Margot started laughing. Not polite laughter. Deep, genuine, delighted laughter that echoed off the windows. Oh my God, she said, wiping her eyes. He's been funding your empire while calling you a leech. The irony is exquisite. I did the math in my head. 36 months. Times 18,000. He's paid me $648,000 in rent. Does the lease have termination penalties? I pulled up the contract. Early termination requires 6 months notice and a penalty equal to 3 months rent. Plus forfeiture of the security deposit. So if he breaks the lease, I get another $54,000, plus $36,000 in forfeited deposit. Total of $90,000. Margot grinned like a wolf. Don't tell him. Not yet. Let him find out in court. I want to see his face when he realizes where his rent checks have been going. That night, something inside me shifted. I sat in my home office, the room Salvatore thought was just a reading nook, surrounded by printouts of financial statements, corporate documents, stock certificates, and rental agreements. The evidence of a life he'd never seen. A success he'd never acknowledged. A woman he'd never known. For 9 years, I'd felt his contempt like acid, eroding my sense of self one insult at a time. I'd internalized his narrative, that I was decorative, purposeless, a burden. Even when my portfolio hit 7 figures, some part of me still believed I was the woman he described. But looking at these documents, this empire I'd built in silence, I finally saw the truth. I wasn't a victim. I was a strategist. I wasn't weak. I was patient. I wasn't a leech. I was a predator who'd been waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. And that moment was coming. I stopped feeling pain. Pain was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I felt something colder, clearer, sharper. I felt the way a surgeon must feel before a complicated operation, focused, precise, aware that every cut must be intentional. Salvatore thought he was divorcing a housewife. He was about to face a portfolio manager who'd outperformed the S&P 500 for a decade. 2 days before the settlement hearing, Margot called with a proposal. "I want to hold back your financial disclosure," she said. Salvatore's lawyers are required to submit his settlement proposal first. Once they do, it's locked in. They can't amend it without judicial permission, which they won't get unless there's evidence of fraud or material misrepresentation. And if we wait to disclose my assets until after they file, then they're stuck with their laughable $50,000 offer. They'll look like they tried to defraud the court by grossly misrepresenting your financial position. Which is exactly what they're doing. Is that legal? We're not required to disclose until the court-ordered deadline, which is the day of the hearing. Everything we're doing is completely above board. We're just strategically timing our transparency. I smiled. Do it. The final disclosure binder arrived by courier 3 days later. It was 3 inches thick, bound in navy blue leather, with my name embossed in gold on the cover, Roxanne Aston, Financial Disclosure and Asset Valuation. I sat at my dining room table, the table where Salvatore had told me I contributed nothing, and reviewed every page. Gerald's forensic accounting report. Margot's legal analysis. Stock certificates. Corporate registrations. Property deeds. Bank statements showing account balances that would make Salvatore's knees buckle. And there, on page 247, the summary line. Total separate property net worth, $31,437,900. I read it 3 times, letting the number sink in. Not because I didn't know my worth, I'd been tracking it to the penny for years. But because this was the first time it would be visible. The first time anyone besides me would know what I'd built. The first time Salvatore would understand exactly who he'd underestimated. I signed the disclosure statement with a fountain pen, my signature steady and clear. Then I closed the binder and slid it back into its protective sleeve. Across the table, Margot was watching me with an expression that might have been pride. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Powerful," I said. And I meant it. She picked up the binder, testing its weight in her hands. "This is a weapon, Roxanne. And when this hits the courtroom, your husband won't know what world he's standing in." The night before the hearing, Salvatore hosted a dinner party at the guest house. I could hear the laughter from the main house, his business partners, his investors, his friends, all celebrating the brilliant CEO who was finally cutting loose the dead weight dragging him down. At one point, the sound of champagne corks popping echoed across the yard. I stood at the window, watching the golden lights spilling from the guest house windows, listening to them toast to Salvatore's future. And I smiled. Because tomorrow, in a courtroom downtown, I was going to show them exactly what kind of dead weight I'd been carrying all along. Tomorrow, the king was going to fall. And I was going to be the one who pushed him. The family court building smelled like floor polish and broken promises. I arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in a suit that cost more than Salvatore's proposed settlement, navy Armani, tailored to perfection, paired with Louboutin heels that clicked against the marble floor like a countdown timer. My hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon. My makeup was minimal but precise. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who knew her worth down to the last decimal point. Margot met me in the hallway outside courtroom 6, her briefcase in one hand and the navy binder tucked under her other arm like a loaded weapon. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Ready," I said. And I was. Through the courtroom's small window, I could see Salvatore already seated at the respondent's table, flanked by his legal team, two sharks in expensive suits who'd probably assured him this would be a quick, painless extraction. He was leaning back in his chair, phone in hand, scrolling with the casual arrogance of a man who believed the outcome was already decided. He was wearing his favorite Tom Ford suit, the charcoal one he saved for board meetings and victories. His hair was freshly cut, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked like success incarnate, like a man who'd never lost anything in his life. That was about to change. "Remember," Margot said quietly, "no reactions. No matter what he says, no matter how he tries to provoke you, you stay ice. Judges notice everything, and the woman who keeps her composure while her husband loses his always wins." "I know." "Good." She checked her watch. 5 minutes. Let's go end his world. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more administrative than theatrical. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided from the bench, a woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human bullshit. She'd been a family court judge for 23 years, and according to Margot's research, she had zero patience for husbands who tried to hide assets or lowball their wives. Perfect. I took my seat at the petitioner's table, folding my hands in my lap, spine straight, breathing steady. Across the aisle, Salvatore finally glanced up from his phone. When he saw me, his lips curved into something that might have been a smile but looked more like a smirk. He leaned toward his lead attorney, Martin Garrett, 62, partner at Garrett & Stone, reputation for grinding down opposition through attrition and intimidation, and whispered something. Garrett glanced at me, then back at Salvatore, and nodded. They thought I was already beaten. They thought this was a formality. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Hendricks presiding. We stood. The judge entered, settled into her seat, and scanned the room with the expression of someone who'd seen this exact scenario 1,000 times before. "Be seated." She opened the case file. Aston versus Aston, dissolution of marriage, settlement hearing. "Counsel, are both parties present and ready to proceed?" "Ready, Your Honor," Margot said. "Ready, Your Honor," Garrett echoed, his voice carrying the bored confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. "Very well." Judge Hendricks looked at Salvatore's table. "Mr. Garrett, I understand the respondent has submitted a settlement proposal. Please present it for the record." Garrett stood, smoothing his tie, projecting the gravitas of a man about to deliver profound wisdom. "Thank you, Your Honor. My client, Mr. Salvatore Aston, has prepared what we believe is a fair and generous settlement offer, one that reflects both the length of the marriage and Mrs. Aston's contributions to the household." Contributions to the household. As if I'd been the help. "Mr. Aston is a self-made entrepreneur," Garrett continued, warming to his narrative. He built Aston Performance Group from nothing into a thriving enterprise currently valued at approximately $18 million. Throughout this journey, Mrs. Aston provided valuable support as a homemaker, creating a stable domestic environment that allowed Mr. Aston to focus on his business pursuits. I kept my face neutral, but inside, I was cataloging every word for future use. In recognition of her contributions, Mr. Aston is prepared to offer a one-time settlement payment of $50,000, full ownership of the 2022 Mercedes-Benz sedan currently registered in her name, and coverage of her health insurance for a period of 6 months post-dissolution. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's fingers on the stenography machine. Additionally, Garrett added, "Mr. Aston requests that Mrs. Aston sign a standard non-disclosure agreement regarding the marriage and settlement terms, to protect both parties' privacy going forward." Translation: keep quiet about how badly I screwed you over. Judge Hendricks's expression didn't change, but I saw her pen move across her notepad in sharp, quick strokes. "Is there anything else, Mr. Garrett?" "Just one thing, Your Honor." He paused for effect. "Mr. Aston wants the court to understand that this offer is made in a spirit of generosity, not obligation. Mrs. Aston has no documented income, no employment history for the past 9 years, and no separate assets to speak of. She is, for all practical purposes, financially dependent on my client's goodwill. This settlement, while modest by some standards, represents a significant gift that will allow her to transition to independence with dignity." Gift. He'd actually called it a gift. I felt Margot's hand briefly touch my arm under the table, a reminder to stay calm, stay cold, stay focused. Judge Hendricks set down her pen. "And has Mrs. Aston responded to this proposal?" "She has, Your Honor," Margot said, standing. "My client rejects the proposal in its entirety." Salvatore's smirk faltered slightly. "Furthermore," Margot continued, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a scalpel, "my client has prepared an amended financial disclosure that we believe will significantly impact the court's understanding of the marital estate and each party's actual financial position." Garrett's head snapped toward Margot. "Your Honor, we received Mrs. Aston's initial disclosure weeks ago. It showed no significant assets. If counsel is attempting to introduce new evidence at this late stage." "The disclosure deadline is today, Your Honor," Margot interrupted smoothly. "We're well within the court's timeline. We simply chose to file at the last permissible moment to ensure accuracy. Translation: we wanted to make sure you couldn't amend your bullshit offer once you saw what we actually had." Judge Hendricks raised an eyebrow. "Proceed, Ms. Lane." Margot nodded to the bailiff, who walked to our table and picked up the navy binder. It looked heavy in his hands, 3 inches of documentation, evidence, proof. He carried it across the courtroom and set it in front of Salvatore. The thud echoed like a gunshot. Salvatore stared at the binder, then at me, confusion flickering across his face. "What is this?" "That," Margot said, "is your wife's actual financial disclosure. I recommend you read it carefully, Mr. Aston. Starting with page 247. I watched Salvatore open the binder, and I memorized every micro-expression that crossed his face. First, curiosity. He was flipping through pages casually, like this was some kind of clerical error he could dismiss. Then, confusion. His fingers slowed as he started actually reading. Stock certificates. Corporate registrations. Account statements with numbers that didn't make sense. Then, irritation. He looked up at his attorneys, clearly expecting them to explain why his wife, his useless, jobless, purposeless wife, seemed to have documentation suggesting otherwise. And finally, disbelief. He'd reached page 247. I saw the exact moment his brain processed the number. His eyes widened. His face drained of color so fast I thought he might actually faint. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish drowning in air. "This is," he stammered, looking at Garrett. "This can't be." "What is it?" Garrett demanded, grabbing the binder. Salvatore's voice came out strangled. "It says she has $31 million. The courtroom went completely silent. Garrett yanked the binder toward him, scanning the summary page. His professional composure cracked like thin ice. "Your Honor, this has to be a mistake. Some kind of, we need time to verify." "It's not a mistake," Margot said calmly. "Every asset is fully documented. Every transaction is traceable. Every dollar is accounted for. My client has a net worth of $31,437,900 in separate property, all of which can be definitively traced to premarital assets and postmarital income streams that were entirely her own." Salvatore was flipping through the binder now, frantically, desperately, like he was looking for the page that would make this make sense. I watched him scan the stock certificates, the quantum computing company, the AI supply chain platform, the micromobility firm, all the bets I'd made that had paid off exponentially. "This is fraud," he shouted, standing up so fast his chair scraped backward. She's lying. She hasn't worked in 9 years. She doesn't have any money. She can't just. Mr. Aston, Judge Hendricks said sharply, you will sit down and control yourself, or I will hold you in contempt. He sat, but his hands were shaking. Garrett was whispering urgently in his ear, but Salvatore wasn't listening. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not just shock, but something deeper. Betrayal. Horror. The dawning realization that the woman he dismissed as decorative had been playing an entirely different game. Your Honor, Garrett said, recovering some composure, we need to request a continuance to review these documents. If Mrs. Aston does possess assets of this magnitude, there are serious questions about commingling, about whether marital funds were used. They weren't, Margot said. Page 18, Forensic Accounting Report from Gerald Moss, CPA. Every investment traced back to Mrs. Aston's premarital savings of $270,000, earned during her 8 years as a venture capital associate at Greystone Capital. Every subsequent gain reinvested from previous gains. Not a single dollar of marital funds touched. It's all there, counselor. Feel free to review it. Salvatore was on page 89 now. I knew what he was looking at, Ironbridge Logistics LLC. I watched his finger trace down the page to the corporate structure. Owner, Roxanne Chen. Managing member, Roxanne Chen. Tax ID number. Business address. Property deed. And then the tenant list. Tenant 1, Cascade Distribution. Tenant 2, Harbor Medical Supply. Tenant 3, Aston Performance Group. His face went from white to red to purple. He couldn't even form words. His finger was stabbing at the page. This is, you. Is there a problem, Mr. Aston? Margot asked innocently. She owns my warehouse, he exploded. APG has been paying rent to, she's been, this whole time. Your company has indeed been leasing 15,000 square feet from Ironbridge Logistics, Margot confirmed. At $18,000 per month, for 30-6 months, total payment stow date, $18,000 per month. For 36 months. Total payments to date, $18,000 per month, for 30-6 months, total payment stow date, $648,000. The lease is valid, legally binding, and was negotiated at fair market rates. Your COO signed it. You never asked who owned the building. Salvatore looked like he was going to be sick. Your Honor, Garrett tried again, even if these assets are technically separate property, the magnitude suggests. The magnitude suggests that Mrs. Aston is an exceptionally skilled investor, Judge Hendricks interrupted, her voice dry. Which is not a crime, Mr. Garrett. She flipped through the binder, reading quickly but thoroughly. I saw her pause on the rental income documentation, on the stock performance charts, on Gerald's forensic report. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught the slightest flicker of something that might have been impressed. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Garrett, am I to understand that your client offered Mrs. Aston, a woman with a documented net worth exceeding $31 million, a settlement of $50,000? Garrett's jaw tightened. Your Honor, at the time the settlement was proposed, we had no knowledge. Because you didn't ask, Judge Hendricks said flatly. Or more accurately, because your client assumed his wife had nothing worth asking about. Salvatore was hunched over the binder now, still flipping pages like he was trying to find the appendix that proved this was all an elaborate prank. His breathing was ragged. His perfectly styled hair was falling forward. His Tom Ford suit looked rumpled, like confidence was the only thing that had been holding it together. Ironbridge, he muttered, almost to himself. The warehouse. I've been paying her. All this time. While I. He looked up at me, and for the first time in 9 years, he actually saw me. Not the wife he'd molded. Not the decoration he'd dismissed. Not the burden he'd complained about. He saw the venture capitalist who'd outplayed him at every turn. He saw the woman who'd built an empire while he'd called her lazy. He saw the predator who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. And he saw that he'd already lost. Your Honor, he said desperately, turning to the judge, I want to amend my settlement offer. There was a misunderstanding, if I'd known. Were you planning to offer more or less, Mr. Aston? Judge Hendricks asked, her tone knife-sharp. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Because what could he say? That he'd offer her more now that he knew she didn't need it? That he'd try to claim half of assets he'd spent 9 years insisting she didn't have? That he'd suddenly become generous after spending years calling her worthless? Any answer would make him look like exactly what he was, a man who'd grossly underestimated his wife and was now scrambling to minimize the damage. Judge Hendricks let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then she set the binder aside and folded her hands on the bench. The court, she said clearly, will not accept Mr. Aston's proposal. Judge Hendricks removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench with deliberate precision. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike, a signal that what came next would be final, irrevocable, and devastating. I've presided over family court for 23 years, she began, her voice calm but edged with steel. In that time, I've seen every variation of marital dissolution. Amicable separations. Bitter divorces. Cases involving hidden assets, undisclosed income, fraudulent disclosures. But this, she gestured to the navy binder, is something different entirely. Salvatore's attorney started to stand. Your Honor, if we could just... Sit down, Mr. Garrett. Judge Hendricks didn't raise her voice, but he sat anyway. I'm not finished. She picked up the settlement proposal Salvatore had submitted, holding it between two fingers like it was contaminated. Mr. Aston, your proposal characterizes your wife as financially dependent, unemployed, and possessing no separate assets. You offered her $50,000, less than 0.3% of your own company's valuation, and framed it as generosity. Your attorney used the word gift. Salvatore's face was the color of wet concrete. And yet, Judge Hendricks continued, opening the binder to a marked page, the evidence shows that Mrs. Aston has been consistently employed, self-employed, to be precise, managing a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio and operating a successful commercial real estate LLC. Her net worth exceeds your company's valuation by a factor of approximately 1.7. She doesn't need your generosity, Mr. Aston. She never did. Your Honor, I didn't know, Salvatore started. Because you didn't ask, Judge Hendricks interrupted. More accurately, because you assumed. You assumed your wife was doing nothing during your marriage. You assumed she had no income, no assets, no value beyond her role as your domestic support system. And based on those assumptions, which, I note, you never bothered to verify, you attempted to settle this divorce for an amount that can only be described as insulting. She flipped to another page, and I knew from the page number exactly what she was reading, the rental income documentation. Let's discuss Ironbridge Logistics, she said. Mrs. Aston formed this LLC in 2019 using her own separate property funds. She purchased a warehouse facility, secured commercial tenants, and has been generating approximately $43,000 per month in rental income. One of those tenants, the primary tenant, in fact, is your company, Mr. Aston. Salvatore looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Your company has paid Mrs. Aston $648,000 over the course of your lease. During that same period, according to testimony from earlier proceedings, you repeatedly called your wife lazy, unproductive, and financially dependent. You told her she contributed nothing. You told her she was a burden. The judge's voice remained level, but each word landed like a hammer. Meanwhile, you were literally paying her rent every month. Someone in the gallery, probably a law student observing the proceedings, let out a barely suppressed snort. Salvatore's shoulders hunched. Your Honor, Garrett tried again, my client genuinely believed. What your client believed is irrelevant, Judge Hendricks said flatly. What matters is what he should have known had he exercised even minimal due diligence. California is a community property state, Mr. Garrett. Both parties have a fiduciary duty to disclose their financial positions accurately and completely. Mrs. Aston fulfilled that duty. Your client did not. She turned to a new section of the binder, and I watched Salvatore's eyes follow her fingers. Let's review the asset classification, Judge Hendricks said. Mrs. Aston's $31.4 million portfolio has been forensically traced to premarital assets and postmarital separate property income. No commingling. No marital funds involved. Under California Family Code Section 770, these assets are her separate property and are not subject to division. Salvatore made a sound like a wounded animal. However, the judge continued, and Salvatore's head snapped up with desperate hope. There are marital assets to consider. The family home, purchased during the marriage. Mr. Aston's retirement accounts, accumulated during the marriage. Vehicles. Furnishings. And Mr. Aston's company, while founded pre-marriage, appreciated significantly during the marriage, making that appreciation community property. Garrett was scribbling notes frantically. Normally, Judge Hendricks said, would divide community assets 50-50ths. But I'm not inclined to do that here. The courtroom went silent. Mr. Aston, you came into this proceeding in bad faith. You attempted to grossly undervalue your wife's contributions, financial and otherwise. You submitted a settlement proposal that, had it been accepted, would have constituted a form of financial abuse. You demonstrated, through your own testimony and documentation, a pattern of diminishing, dismissing, and demeaning your spouse. She paused, letting that sink in. Furthermore, the evidence suggests you were planning this divorce specifically to protect your assets before a business expansion, essentially treating your wife as a liability to be eliminated rather than a partner to be respected. That kind of calculated disregard for your fiduciary duties does not sit well with this court. Salvatore's attorney was whispering urgently in his ear, but Salvatore just sat there, frozen, watching his world collapse in real time. Therefore, Judge Hendricks said, I am ruling as follows. First, Mrs. Aston's separate property portfolio, valued at $31,437,900, remains entirely hers. No division. No claims. Mr. Aston has no interest in these assets whatsoever. Second, the marital residence, currently valued at $2.3 million, will be sold and proceeds divided 60/40ths in Mrs. Aston's favor, reflecting her superior equitable position. Third, Mr. Aston's retirement accounts, totaling approximately $890,000, will be divided 60/40ths in Mrs. Aston's favor. Fourth, regarding Aston Performance Group, the portion of appreciation attributable to the marital period will be calculated and divided. Based on the forensic valuation submitted, approximately $11.2 million in company value accrued during the marriage. Mrs. Aston is entitled to 55% of that amount. The calculator in my head did the math instantly, $6.16 million. Salvatore's face went from red to white to gray. Wait, he stammered, finding his voice. Wait. Your Honor, you can't, I built that company. That's my life's work. She never what, Mr. Aston? Judge Hendricks asked icily. She never supported you? Never provided the stable home environment your own attorney cited as her contribution? Never freed you to focus on your business while she handled everything else? But she was secretly building her own empire. Salvatore shouted, standing again despite Garrett trying to pull him back down. She lied to me. She hid everything. She made me think she was. She made you think what? You built it during your marriage, the judge said simply. Your wife is entitled to her share. Can we negotiate? Can I buy her out? Pay her overtime instead of. That's between you and your wife, Judge Hendricks said. But the ruling stands. Mrs. Aston is entitled to 55% of the marital portion of Aston Performance Group's value, payable within 180 days unless alternative arrangements are agreed upon by both parties. Salvatore turned to look at me for the first time since the hearing began. His eyes were desperate, pleading, searching my face for any sign of mercy. I kept my expression neutral. Empty. The same face he'd looked at for 9 years without really seeing. Additionally, Judge Hendricks continued, Mrs. Aston is entitled to reimbursement for her attorney's fees and court costs, which I'm ordering Mr. Aston to pay in full. And finally, given Mr. Aston's documented pattern of financial manipulation and bad faith dealing, I'm denying his request for any confidentiality agreement. Mrs. Aston is free to discuss the terms of this divorce as she sees fit. The final nail in the coffin. Salvatore had wanted to silence me, to make sure I couldn't tell anyone how badly he'd tried to screw me over. Now the entire settlement would be public record, available to any journalist, investor, or business partner who cared to look. His reputation, the thing he'd valued above everything, including his marriage, was about to become collateral damage. Mr. Aston, the judge said, do you understand the court's ruling? He opened his mouth. Closed it. His hands were shaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Aston? Yes, Your Honor, I said clearly. My first words since entering the courtroom. Judge Hendricks gathered her papers. Then this court is adjourned. The formal divorce decree will be issued within 30 days. Both parties are ordered to comply with all asset transfers and financial obligations as outlined. We're done here. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. It was over. I stood, smoothing my suit jacket, and reached for my briefcase. Margot was beside me, suppressing a smile that threatened to split her face in half. Nicely done, she murmured. In 27 years of practice, I've never seen a cleaner kill. I didn't respond. I was watching Salvatore across the aisle, watching him sit motionless at the respondent's table while his attorneys packed up their files in tense silence. Garrett looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. His junior associate was pale as death, probably calculating how this loss would affect the firm's reputation. But Salvatore just sat there, staring at the binders still open in front of him. At the numbers that had unmade his world. At the evidence of a wife who'd outplayed him so thoroughly he hadn't even known the game was being played. I picked up my briefcase and turned toward the exit. I'd made it 3 steps when I heard his chair scrape backward. Roxanne. I paused but didn't turn around. Roxanne, wait. Please. Margot touched my arm, a silent warning, you don't have to do this. But some part of me needed to. Needed to hear what he would say now that the mask had finally slipped. Now that he'd been stripped of his illusions and forced to confront the reality he'd refused to see. I turned slowly. Salvatore was standing now, and for the first time in our entire marriage, he looked genuinely uncertain. His perfect hair was disheveled. His Tom Ford suit hung on him like borrowed clothes. His face was the face of a man who just watched his entire self-concept get dismantled by a family court judge. Can we? He glanced at his attorneys, then at the door. Can we talk? Privately? I don't think that's wise, Margot said. 5 minutes, Salvatore said, looking only at me. Please. I need to understand. I need to, just 5 minutes. Against every instinct, I nodded. Margot's expression said I was making a mistake, but she stepped back. I'll be right outside. The hallway was marble and echo, empty except for the two of us. Through the tall windows, I could see the city spread out below, all glass and steel and ambition, the same city where we'd met a decade ago. The same city where I'd believed we were building something together. Salvatore waited until Margot disappeared around the corner. Then he turned to me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Desperation. How? He said simply. How did you do it? All of it. The investments. The LLC. How did I not know? You didn't ask, I said. The same thing the judge had said. The same truth he kept refusing to accept. But you were, every day I came home, you were just, he gestured helplessly. You were cooking dinner. You were reading. You were doing yoga. You looked like Like I had nothing better to do? I supplied. He flinched. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. My voice was calm. Clinical. You meant it exactly like that. You needed me to be small, Salvatore. You needed me to be less than you. Because if I was smart, capable, successful, if I was an equal, then you couldn't be the hero of your own story anymore. That's not true. I loved you. He stepped closer, and I saw his hand start to reach for mine before he caught himself. I made mistakes, Rox. I see that now. I was blind. I was arrogant. I took you for granted. But now that I know, now that I see what you really are. What I really am. I repeated, something cold sliding down my spine. You're brilliant, he said, and he sounded genuinely awed. You're a fucking genius. Those returns, that portfolio, the way you played the market, Roxanne, you're exactly the kind of partner I need. We could be unstoppable together. A real power couple. You understand business. You understand strategy. We could merge our resources, rebuild Aston Performance with your capital, expand faster than I ever dreamed. I felt something inside me go very still. You don't love me, I said quietly. What? No, of course I. You love what you think I can do for you now, I continued, each word precisely measured. When you thought I was worthless, you wanted to discard me. Now that you know I'm valuable, you want to use me. But you don't actually. This wasn't love. This wasn't even guilt. This was a business pitch. No, I said simply. Roxanne, please. No, Salvatore. I spent 9 years being what you needed me to be. I'm done performing for you. I'm not asking you to perform. I'm asking you to partner with me. Really partner. As equals. We were never equals, I said. Not in your mind. I was either beneath you or useful to you, but I was never actually with you. And I'm not interested in finding out which version of me you'll resent 5 years from now when the novelty wears off. His jaw tightened. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? Take half my company and disappear? There it was. The real anger, finally surfacing. Not sorrow. Not regret. Just fury that I'd won. I'm taking what the court determined I'm entitled to, I said. The same thing you tried to take from me, except my number was based on law and equity, and yours was based on contempt. You played me, he said, and now there was genuine venom in his voice. This whole time. You let me think, you made me believe you were nothing, and you were just waiting for the right moment to destroy me. I didn't destroy you, Salvatore. I just stopped protecting you from yourself. You hid everything. You lied to me for years. I maintained my privacy, I corrected. There's a difference. And the irony of you calling me deceptive, when you were literally planning to divorce me before your next funding round to avoid splitting assets, is almost beautiful. He went pale. You saw the email. I saw the email. Rebecca wasn't supposed to, that was confidential. And yet she sent it. And I read it. And that's how I knew exactly what kind of man I married. Not the ambitious entrepreneur I fell in love with. The calculating opportunist who valued his wife at $50,000. Salvatore's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually try to grab me. But he just stood there, shaking with impotent rage, watching me with eyes that finally, saw exactly who I was. You're going to regret this, he said, voice low and dangerous. When you're alone in whatever mansion you buy with my money. When you realize you threw away a real partnership for what? Revenge? I didn't throw away a partnership, I said quietly. I dissolved a delusion. There's a difference. I turned toward the elevator, and this time, I didn't pause. Roxanne, he called after me, his voice breaking. Roxanne, wait. Don't do this. We can work something out. I'll pay you in installments. I'll give you whatever you want. Just don't destroy everything I built. Please. I pressed the button for the elevator. The doors opened immediately, like they'd been waiting. Roxanne. I stepped inside and turned to face him one last time. He was standing in the middle of the marble hallway, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Diminished. Defeated. The king who'd discovered too late that his crown was made of paper. Goodbye, Salvatore, I said. The doors began to close. And in the narrowing gap, I saw him mouth my name one final time. Not angry. Not manipulative. Not negotiating. Just broken. Like a prayer no one was listening to anymore. The elevator descended, and I leaned against the cool metal wall, breathing slowly, deliberately, forcing my heart rate to stabilize. It was done. The marriage was over. The war was won. The king had fallen. And I, Roxanne Aston, venture capitalist, real estate mogul, the wife everyone thought was decorative, I was finally, irrevocably, triumphantly free. Margot was waiting in the lobby, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She took one look at my face and smiled. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Powerful, I said. And for the first time in 9 years, I meant it. The courthouse doors opened onto a world that looked exactly the same but felt entirely different. Sunlight poured down through a break in the clouds, warm and golden, painting the marble steps in shades of honey and amber. The city hummed around me, cars rushing past, people hurrying to meetings, construction crews hammering away at the skeleton of some new high-rise. Life, moving forward, relentless and indifferent to the small dramas playing out in courtrooms and conference rooms across the city. I stood at the top of the steps, briefcase in one hand, and just breathed. Deep. Clean. Free. For 9 years, I'd held my breath without realizing it. I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less visible, not because Salvatore demanded it explicitly, but because the alternative was constant friction, constant justification, constant defense of my right to exist as something more than his supporting character. I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without permission. Behind me, the courthouse doors opened again. Margot emerged, phone pressed to her ear, her other hand making sharp gestures that probably meant she was eviscerating someone's legal argument. She caught my eye, held up one finger, "Give me a minute," and continued her conversation while pacing the landing. I descended the steps slowly, feeling the sun on my face, the breeze lifting strands of hair that had escaped my chignon. My heels clicked against marble, then concrete, then the rough pavement of the sidewalk. Each step took me farther from the courtroom, from the marriage, from the woman I'd been pretending to be. Halfway down the block, I stopped and turned back to look at the courthouse. It was just a building. Limestone and glass and the weight of 1,000 broken promises. But inside that building, something had shifted. Not just legally, though the decree dissolving my marriage would arrive in 30 days, official and final. Something deeper. I'd stopped believing his story about me. For years, I'd lived in a strange cognitive dissonance. Part of me knew my worth, knew it with mathematical precision, tracked it in spreadsheets and quarterly statements, watched it compound with the reliable beauty of well-timed investments. But another part of me, the part that heard Salvatore's casual contempt every day, the part that absorbed his narrative about the useless wife who contributed nothing, that part had started to believe him. Not consciously. I never would have admitted it out loud. But in subtle ways, I'd internalized the story. I'd stopped mentioning my wins at dinner. I'd hidden my excitement when a position paid off. I'd made myself invisible in my own life because it was easier than fighting his narrative every single day. But standing on that sidewalk, briefcase in hand, divorce decree pending, $31.4 million in assets that belonged to no one but me, I finally felt the cognitive dissonance resolve. Marcus, heard through the grapevine you're officially single. Congratulations and/or condolences, whichever applies. Question, you still interested in the industrial logistics play we discussed last year? I've got a deal on the table that has your name written all over it. I smiled and typed back, details? Marcus, 3 warehouses in the Inland Empire. Climate-controlled, rail access, current occupancy 87%, undervalued by about $4 million because the owner is retiring and his kids don't want to run it. Clean financials. Seller financing available. I'm putting together a consortium. Thought of you first. Me, send the deck. And the pro forma. I want to see the numbers. Marcus, already emailed. Check your personal account, not the one your husband has access to. Me, ex-husband. As of about an hour ago. Marcus, even better. Welcome back to the game, Roxanne. We missed you. I stood on the sidewalk, sun warming my shoulders, and felt something spark to life in my chest. Not vindication, that had come in the courtroom. The house was empty when I arrived. Salvatore's things were already mostly gone, moved to the guest house weeks ago when he'd filed for divorce. All that remained were the furniture we'd bought together, the art he'd chosen, the kitchen gadgets we'd never used. I walked through the rooms slowly, taking inventory not of objects but of memories. The dining room where he'd told investors I was his secret weapon, while simultaneously implying I did nothing all day. The living room where I'd read financial journals while he assumed I was reading novels. The kitchen where I'd chopped vegetables and listened to him dismiss my intelligence over $400 bottles of wine. No good memories. Not really. Just years of performing a role I'd never auditioned for. I climbed the stairs to my office, the small room at the end of the hall that Salvatore had called a reading nook, because acknowledging it as a workspace would have contradicted his narrative. This was where I'd built everything. Where I'd tracked markets and analyzed companies and made the decisions that had turned 270,000 into 270,000 into 270,000 into 31.4 million. Where I'd created Ironbridge Logistics, negotiated leases, managed tenants. Where I'd become the woman Salvatore had never bothered to meet. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started drafting an email to my property manager. Subject, Ironbridge Logistics Expansion Strategy. Jennifer. Following the successful performance of our current facility, I'm exploring opportunities to expand our commercial real estate portfolio. I'm particularly interested in climate-controlled warehouse properties in strategic logistics corridors. Let's schedule a call this week to discuss acquisition targets and financing options. Also, please prepare a complete tenant performance review for our existing property. I want to understand which lease structures are working and which need optimization. We're going to scale this operation, which means we need our processes airtight. Best. Roxanne Chen. I hit send and felt something click into place. Not just the decision to expand, that was obvious, inevitable. But the signature. Roxanne Chen. Not Roxanne Aston. Not Roxanne Chen Aston. Just Roxanne Chen. The woman I'd been before the marriage. The woman I'd remained throughout the marriage, hidden in spreadsheets and separate accounts. The woman I was becoming now that the marriage was over. My phone buzzed with a response from Jennifer. She was one of those miracle workers who answered emails at 7 p.m. like it was the middle of the workday. Jennifer, fantastic timing. I've been tracking 3 potential acquisitions that fit your criteria. 2 in the Inland Empire, might overlap with what you're already seeing, 1 in Arizona near the Phoenix distribution hub. All under market value, all with expansion potential. Want the analysis? Me, send everything. And let's talk tomorrow afternoon. I'm doing site visits in the morning, but I'm free after 2 p.m. Jennifer, you've got it. Welcome back, boss. I had a feeling you were gearing up for something big. I smiled at that. Welcome back. As if I'd been gone. As if I'd ever stopped working, stopped strategizing, stopped building. I hadn't been gone. I'd just been invisible. And invisible women can accomplish extraordinary things while everyone's looking the other way. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety or grief or any of the emotions that probably should have accompanied the dissolution of a 9-year marriage. I couldn't sleep because my mind was racing with possibilities. The warehouse deal Marcus had proposed. The expansion of Ironbridge Logistics. The AI companies I'd been tracking that were about to enter their growth phase. The renewable energy sector that was finally reaching critical mass. The opportunities that had been accumulating like water behind a dam while I'd been trapped in a marriage that demanded I stay small. Now the dam was broken. And I was ready to flood forward. I got out of bed at 3 a.m., made coffee, and opened my laptop. I built spreadsheets. I modeled scenarios. I researched markets and analyzed trends and sketched out a 5-year strategic plan that would take Ironbridge Logistics from a single-property LLC to a regional portfolio worth 8 figures. Somewhere around 5 a.m., I realized I was smiling. Not the careful, practiced smile I'd worn to Salvatore's business dinners. Not the quiet, deferential smile I'd used to diffuse his irritation when I didn't have dinner ready on time. This was real. Unguarded. The smile of someone doing exactly what they were meant to do. When the sun rose, I was still working. I showered, dressed in clothes that felt like armor, tailored trousers, silk blouse, leather jacket that probably cost more than Salvatore's settlement offer, and headed out to meet Marcus. The warehouses were everything the deck had promised. Solid bones, good locations, underutilized potential. By noon, I'd committed to joining Marcus's consortium. By 2 p.m., I was on a call with Jennifer, discussing financing structures for the Arizona property. By 4 p.m., I'd reviewed 3 pitch decks from tech startups looking for seed funding. By 6 p.m., I'd committed $500,000 to a quantum computing company that was doing exactly what my first quantum bet had done 7 years ago, operating in a space everyone else thought was too speculative, too risky, too far ahead of the market. Everyone else was wrong. They usually were. I knew how to spot the future. That had always been my gift. The ability to see what was coming before anyone else recognized the pattern. And what I saw coming now was my own empire. Built on my terms. Answerable to no one. Limited only by my own vision and the hours in a day. Salvatore had called me a leech. He'd called me lazy, useless, a burden on his success. He'd tried to divorce me for $50,000 and a used car. But now the world knew the truth. I didn't take from anyone. I built. And from here on out, standing in my office, sun setting over a city full of opportunities one was finally free to chase, I built only for myself. The queen had risen. And her reign was just beginning.